Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Gen Con panel on Bloomburrow.
Hello, hello.
Today we're going to talk about Magic the Gathering's coziest set. Hold on, let me adjust this a little bit so I'm not leaning like a weirdo the whole time. All right. So, I'm Harless Snyder. That's me with my cat. Her name's Belmont. She's lovely. I am the host of the Magic Story podcast and also the narrator for Magic Story, and I am joined today by two people who were essential to taking Bloomburrow from just an idea into a reality. Today we have Neal LaPlante-Johnson, as well as Zack, Stella. So I'm going to tell you the structure of our panel so you kind of have an idea what you're in for here. Please don't leap after I tell you this. It's really good, I promise. So we're going to talk through some of the stages of the world building for this set that brought about the ability to actually create cards and make this thing a playable set. Who has played Bloomburrow this weekend? Yeah, yay. Everybody having fun? Awesome. All right, so we're going to start off with vision, move into concept push, world guide, and then concepting. And I'm going to go ahead and start with vision design and kick it over to Neal.
Yeah, so if people are familiar with the development process of Magic, and people know how you make cards, vision design is kind of the first step in making a Magic the Gathering set. So this set was codenamed Rugby, and our vision design team was led by Emily Tang. I was on that and the lead art director at the time, and now is Zack Stella. So you can see some cute art and stuff. So
Awesome. So first we start off with testing, right? We go into figuring out what we want to do here. So before we talk about what Bloomburrow was, let's talk about what Bloomburrow could have been.
Yeah.
It was throwing out a lot of really crazy ideas at first. As you can see on like the top here, this was like one of our very early testing plates where we were trying to determine whether or not we wanted to go in like a solar punk direction. It really just retained like the cottage core from that. And then the bottom thing was like trying to find the level of anthro, which sometimes you just, you need to see the weird thing to know that it's not working.
You know, when you're testing, it's sort of like you want someone to tell you no to the bad ideas so that when somebody asks later, you go, yeah, no, we're definitely not doing that. And you at least have a data point. But yeah, we explored solar punk as well as ideas about like humans going extinct, like a world that humans had built and then they went extinct and the animals kind of came to life afterwards. And we found a lot of problems with both of those. One, solar punk just is too technological for the premise that we were going for. Testing participants really weren't interested in the idea of adding more technology here. And the humans went extinct asked a lot of questions that we weren't really wanting to answer in the set. It's like the thing that you play Bloomburrow with is the animals. And if people are asking, oh, well, what about the humans? That's not what we want you to think about when you're playing a Magic set. We want you to think about what's on the cards there.
Yep.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So here is one of the examples that we did from early testing, right?
Yes, this is a very early take just to figure out kind of where we were at on what we were looking for calamity beasts and danger level and kind of like where we wanted like an animal adventure party, like just exactly how much grit we wanted in realism in the scene. We obviously went in like a little bit of a different direction for the calamity beasts eventually, which I think was the right decision, but these are still really cool. I kind of want to use them for something.
Yeah, it's so cool here because it's like almost like Cosmos Nebula, but like lightning in there too, which is so different to your point as to like how they ended up.
Right. And we really wanted to provide Bloomburrow and Valley specifically with a threat. And these were just kind of proof of concept, and people responded really positively to the idea of animal folk, sentient, fighting something else outside of their, other animal folk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's where we start to like refine the visuals a little bit and get a little closer. I actually did the one on the right there. But this is just like kind of getting more of that like 1980s cartoon, like that action adventure vibe that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see a lot of like, there's kind of interpersonal stuff with the weasel and the bat fighting, but also that kind of like cooperative element with this Mousefolk and the Birdfolk.
The mouse in a mask riding a bird.
It's
It's so good.
So those are things that testers really responded to well, which leads to sort of the next, like the final direction that we went, which is pastoral, communal. Things that we noticed during testing were that people really wanted to play Animafolk with one another. They wanted to have a party that consisted of, a weasel and a frog and a mouse and a fox. And that was where players were just so excited about that. So in contrast to a setting like Ravnica, where you have all these guilds who are nominally cooperative sometimes, but mostly hate each other, this was a place where people would probably cooperate rather than compete for things.
I ended up putting Omar on like so many pieces this
Yeah,
set
this is-
too. Like he just
So
nailed this
good.
plate
So gorgeous.
right out the gate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I grew up reading a lot of Beatrice Potter and looking at a lot of Beatrice Potter art, and so this to me just feels like home. It feels so cozy. It feels like you can just step right into this. It's so accessible to a lot of people because a lot of us are like really familiar with the style, and the watercolor aspect is just absolutely stunning. I love this so much.
It's just great when you get a testing asset that feels right. When somebody who looks at it just goes, yeah, that's the set that I want you to
Yeah.
make, because it makes my job a lot easier.
And for anybody who felt cheated on badgers, there's another badger.
There's another badger. It's not just hugs. All right, so one of the most difficult things that I imagine happened in testing was that there are a million bazillion cute animals to choose from, but we had to draw the line somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about our animal folk roster.
Yeah, like early on, we had 15 animal types. We had one for each monocolor and then one for each combination of those monocolors. And that's a lot. Like if you're going to play with otters and we only included 4 otters, I'm pretty sure Daniel Holt or someone would have been so mad at me. So you have this kind of unwieldy, gigantic roster that just, it makes sense, but it doesn't really fit the kind of vibe. We want people to play with the animals that we present them, not try and find like just one lizard or one mice or one mole. So
Yeah,
So-
so here we get our like first take on the animals that we put through testing. So obviously like things changed on the way to the final. Some of these actually stayed the same. The squirrel kind of nailed it in one. And obviously like we did get an initial take on a badger because I'm pretty sure that change from badgers to raccoons was pretty late in the game.
yep.
And very, very different tech level take for our otters.
Right. But you can see like remnants. I think some people might be able to recognize that weasel there. We'll get right into that in a little bit later. But some of these just end up being like one-offs, or they end up being the kind of foundation for an entire species visually.
Yeah, the rabbit is pretty close to Phineas in the story, right? We've got
It
a
is.
rabbit archer here. I love the rabbit archer. I did Olympic style archery for a while, so I was like, oh my God, this set is going to be amazing. This set is for me. But we ended up with a little bit of a different roster than we started with.
So we went down to 10, and then we thought, there's a lot of mammals, let's add some lizards. And then the reception to SNC's, Streets of New Capenna's raccoons, we were like, let's bring Racoonfolk in, because people really liked them. They were super cute and charming. And then we were left with kind of a decision after moving raccoons off into red-green, and we were like, everyone likes otters. And we already kind of have red-blue otters somewhere else in Magic. If people remember Lutri from Ikoria. So we're like, this fits. And I'll say this, our vision lead, Emily Tang, is the biggest fan of otters I've ever met. And so she was like, not going to accept a set that wasn't partially part of otters.
Oh yeah, she would have pitched a fit.
Yeah, yeah.
Daniel as well. Again, Daniel Holt absolutely would have come for you.
Yeah, Daniel wasn't in the room when we were talking, so thankfully, we didn't have to fight 2 Otterfolk.
Otherwise, the whole set would be otters. All right, great. And then can you talk a little bit, Zach, about early vision design and how that all happens?
Sure. So when we get to the stage, we all sit in a room, and then I go nuts for about half an hour just scribbling on a whiteboard all my crazy ideas. So I'm just like trying to find some shapes that are recognizable for animal folk homes here. Like this is actually a very early take on what I had in mind for 3 trees and how all the architecture for the animal folk was actually going to sit in the one tree. You can see like the limbs swooping down. Obviously, like cards are very horizontal, so you want to make sure that like when all of your denizens of a plane are like only a foot high, you want to make sure that there's still trees and tree branches in the frame. So I tried to dip them real low. Yeah, like
This is on a whiteboard at work, which means someone probably erased it at some point. Can you believe that? Tragic. All right, so once we did that vision design, we ended up with a few priorities that we wanted to hit.
So the next step of the process is the concept push, and we'll talk about that next. But in order to do that, you have to have priorities in your world building. And so our priorities were pastoral and cute. We knew this was Magic's cutest set ever. We knew it was pastoral from all this testing. We knew that people wanted high magic. This is, in a roster, in a lineup of Magic sets, our most fantasy of the year and probably of last year. And so we wanted to give players the kind of connection immediately, like, oh, this is a set for people who love high fantasy. We wanted to be cooperative. We talked about the idea that animal folk cooperate. They don't really compete so much. And we really wanted it to feel like Magic. But what I mean by that isn't like magical, but like Magic the Gathering. So we looked in our past and we were like, hey, is it feasible that someone could cast Lightning Bolt here? Yeah, if they can do that, if they could cast Dark Ritual, that feels like magic to me. And then we had to lean into the unique characteristics of the animals. So like Frogfolk need to be able to bounce and whatnot, or we needed to lean into the idea that like some animals are more dexterous than others and can make really cool knitted patterns, and others maybe can't because their hands are a little clumsy and small. So then we went into what's called the concept push.
Yeah, so this is our 3-week sprint where I bring in a small team of artists, very specialized folks, to kind of determine the look and the feel of the set, mostly based off of my terrible whiteboard scribbles and then a bunch of notes that I give them.
Yeah, and for this, to give sense of scale, there are essentially 10 factions, 10 species in Bloomburrow. So if you're thinking of, maybe this is mostly comparable to like Call Time with its 10 realms. So for each of those, we needed to find costuming, weapons, anatomy, magic, architecture, and then we have calamity beasts, and then we needed to find each of their scales relative to one another that feels believable and exciting. So a lot of things get solved at this phase visually.
Yeah, so this is one of those first things that we kind of knew we wanted in the set, just to kind of give it a pastoral feel and a little bit of like a rugged, like country sort of vibe.
Yeah.
So quilting, like I know that quilting, codename quilting was like literally right before this, so it was very confusing when we were talking about quilting at every meeting. But I wanted to make sure that each of the towns and the adventuring parties had these quilts where each animal could provide one square for the quilt, and it kind of like symbolizes the unity and the community that we wanted for this set.
Yeah, as a Southerner, I have so many quilts from my late grandparents, and the amount of time and love and care that goes into making a quilt is just, it's so, I don't know if any of y'all have ever made a quilt, but oh my gosh, it takes so long, and it's not, I mean, I've only made the like square patch ones, but they do patterns, and I mean, it's a true art, and it's something that you pass down to the people you love that they literally cover themselves in, a literal blanket. It's so cozy, and I just absolutely love that this was one of the first pieces, because it really, to the point of community, to the point of love in this set, that is such a great visual representation. So I love this.
Yes, this is the next thing we knew we needed, and that is, what do they wear? Because obviously they can't tan other animals.
Thank goodness.
So we came up with a bunch of different ways that they could potentially use like dyed leaf leathers, and then their weapons, obviously, like they're so tiny that like things would have to be smelted like really small, so the heat has to be like a little bit lower. So we came up with these like trees that have this metallic sap on the inside of them, and then maybe they would like use these seed pods stuffed with clay, and they would just literally press natural elements from their environment into the clay to make molds that they can actually like form weapons out of.
I want a leaf purse, please. If someone can make me a tiny leaf purse, that'd be amazing.
I mean, that was literally just my childhood, was picking up sticks in the wood and
Right.
finding what would make a good weapon. So,
Absolutely.
and then moving on from that, it was our take on trying to find the line of where we wanted things to land anatomically and also just like emotionally. It's very easy when you're working with anthropomorphic animals to go cartoon very fast. So it was like determining how much white we wanted in their eyes, how wide their musculature would actually move their mouths if they were to emote, and then just like getting an obviously like an anatomical range for their full bodies if they were kind of just like actual animals that stood up and put on clothing. I think the only thing that we really had to retool to something that wasn't necessarily real world was the bats obviously needed extra fingers outside of their wings so that they could actually cast some magic.
And this is also like a really good tool. So most magic sets have tons of humans and humanoids. And so when you're working with an artist pool that loves doing humans, and then you're like, okay, draw a rabbit. How are they going to make that when I write, this rabbit's sad on a card? How are they going to make that rabbit sad is just a question that we knew we'd have to answer, just so that we could actually make a magic set that felt like every other magic set. And like, this is just an example of the concept push being part of the toolkit that we use to solve what a magic set looks like.
So then these next two slides are kind of interchangeable. This was also just to kind of flesh out the world a little bit, and that's to get old and young denizens of your plane, because then you get like a full sense of the community and how people actually live here.
Yeah, I think that's a part of any community is, people who are old, and then we'll go to people who are young, right? I mean, in any kind of magic set, you can like in diverse age ranges, and so this is like just to make it feel like magic. And we knew we wanted Offspring to have a unique look, so we made a lot of little, child animals. They had to be able to fight. That was our number one rule. They were not newborn. They had to be able to like hold a weapon and swing it, just so that where it's Magic the Gathering, they're going to get into combat, and so you don't feel too bad about that Offspring token.
Yeah, there are a lot of bunnies with shivs. And then this is something that I don't think has ever been talked about up until this panel, but one of the things I wanted for their costuming was to get some of their animal features within the actual patterning of their clothes. So you can see like on the raccoon on the right, he actually sort of has a raccoon face, like in the way that his clothing's stitched together. Or on the frog, like it kind of makes a grumpy frog face when you take the whole thing into consideration.
The little pauldrons as the eyes. It's so cute. Okay, great. So now we have done our concepting, and we move into creating one of my favorite things about getting to work at Magic, which is looking at world guides. If I'm ever stressed out, I'm like, I'm going to go look at a world guide for like an hour. So let's talk a little bit about the world guide development for Bloomburrow.
So the world guide is this kind of equal part inspiration and toolkit. First off, it makes people excited about the set. You get to see all of this awesome art contextualized within a world, but it's also our place where we put everything together. So we have this awesome art, we have ideas about what these animals are doing, but then we kind of codify them. We make civilizations, societies, we make places to go on adventures. We do all this kind of stuff in words and contextualize the images we got in the concept push. For this, the concept push produced like, I don't know, a couple hundred pages of art, and then we added a couple hundred pages more of words to get a 300-page world guide.
It's a lot for 3 weeks. It's a lot.
It's a long process.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the animals in the set. Let's deep dive into creating the Birdfolk.
So the Birdfolk we knew was our white-blue faction, and white-blue has a lot of flyers, a lot of knights, a lot of kind of soldiers, and so we wanted to have this kind of heroic archetype for the Birdfolk. And so you can see plume creeds or other kind of details about them. These are kind of like, they think they're really cool knights and stuff like that, which felt super well mechanically. And also, I think birds are a pretty proud kind of animal. Like in the World Guide, we talked about preening and how they keep themselves looking really cool.
Yeah, we needed the clothing to be like light and fluttery, just to create a lot of movement on cards. All their weaponry would have to be like light reeds that they could pick up, and we had to kind of figure out how they would hold stuff. So like we actually kind of changed their anatomy too, where like their alula feather, their thumb could actually like bend just a little bit just to hold stuff.
I did not know that word until today, by the way.
Yeah, and then just going back to the idea of nightly, so night fisher, a perfect example of like where we wanted birds to land. And I think you had something in mind for when we were making this piece in final. Nature documentaries?
Oh, sure. Yeah. One thing I wanted in the final card art for this set is if you look at a lot of it, is like shots through plants or like things that would resemble something like a nature documentary.
I love how the costuming translated, and so we have the concept piece on the one side by Gray, and then we do have that finalized piece on the other side, and you can see that a lot of those elements are still there, which is just, it's so cool. And they like the eye, the mask, the goggles, they rendered a little more like 3D, I guess I would say, and I just think this looks so amazing. It's like so much motion, so much movement, and still very regal. It's still very beautiful.
It's the act of taking that simple kind of like flat image and turning it into a dynamic piece that we'll talk about concepting later, but that's where this all kind of comes to life.
Okay, I know y'all love some rats, so let's talk about Ratfolk.
So Ratfolk were our blue-black archetype, and Ratfolk in a lot of anthropomorphic media are kind of maligned. We knew we still wanted them to feel like rats in Magic, so a little bit sneaky, a little bit kind of like sus, but they needed something aspirational. Every single animal folk should be something that you could aspire to be. And so for Ratfolk, what we thought was, okay, well, they're sneaky, but they're also blue mana, so let's make them intelligent, like wildly intelligent. They're secret keepers. They have libraries built into these giant knowledge ossuaries. So it's like the idea of merging the idea of, okay, so they're sneaky, they're roguish, but they're also the most clever of the animal folk.
Yeah, and they also bond with insects, which is very easy to get gross really fast. So like keeping things like kind of beautiful in the way they do it was just like one of the key goals. You can see like in their costuming, they'll actually like wear a lot of like iridescent beetle shells or just like moth wings as like their capes and cloaks. The snail shells we'll talk about a little bit later in the panel, but that came like kind of later on down the line.
I love the like horned beetle head
Yeah.
as a hat. It looks fantastic. All right, next up we're going to talk about lizardfolk.
So from a world building perspective, this is one of my favorites because the lizard folk aren't necessarily native to Valley. They're immigrants from other places across Bloomburrow. And that let us do some cool things. One, the species of lizards that we had access to in this biome, we got to diversify a lot. We got to take lizards from all over the world and kind of put them in Valley.
Yeah, really crazy shapes and colors.
It's very cool. And the way that this black-red archetype kind of spun up was I had kind of black mana, which is kind of destructive. Red mana is super creative. And I thought, okay, well, have we done like red-black artisans? Like they make things? And that's cool. But like red-black is definitely not going to keep that thing around. So lizard folk build awesome sculptures and then explode them. And I thought that was pretty fun.
I love a cool mask too. That's something that like I guess I put into. I put it on the rats and the lizards, but one of the things that they have working with them is like different stone material finishes that when they're shooting off like fire or elements, they have like various shades of shine and color on their costuming.
Okay, who's excited about raccoons?
Oh, there's many. So Racoonfolk are a red-green archetype. They're kind of the biggest creatures in Valley. They're kind of the burliest outside of some of those, I don't know, the badgers named Hugs. And so we knew that we wanted to lean into some of the trope space of trash pandas. I think it's like, if we didn't, people would have been like, why aren't they grabbing trash? But we wanted to solve it in an elegant way. So you can see these awesome, like, trash wrapped in these vines. So you have this magical element that also contextualizes their trash panda-y thing in the world.
Yeah, it's like if you ever see like a tree trunk growing around an old bicycle.
Right. And the other cool thing, I think, from a world building angle for Racoonfolk is these are our travelers, denizens that kind of travel not through Valley, but also beyond Valley to the Brambles and even beyond into greater Bloomburrow. So we got to take some really cool liberties and even show one that kind of went through an omen path. If people know Bello, the commander from our commander decks, you can see a hedron in their stick, and it's like, okay, well, I wanted to show some evidence that Racoonfolk aren't just content traveling Bloomburrow, but also the entire multiverse.
Yeah,
Zack, I think these were a little bit challenging because raccoons really only have one fur pattern.
yeah, and I definitely drove you nuts trying to change up species on every card. But yeah, so there's only really one kind of raccoon. So how do we get them to look unique? And it was a lot of like, how does their magic curve around their body and their tails, so where it still kind of looks like stripes, but in a cool way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think these look so different, right? Like the top row to me is like a country raccoon that like is fed really well, and then the bottom to me is like a city raccoon. That's just my opinion. All right, and now we're gonna move into my favorite, which is Rabbitfolk.
Rabbits and Rabbitfolk are kind of our most pastoral animal. They were our white-green archetype. They're going to make a lot of tokens, so they're going to have a big family like rabbits are wont to do. But they are our farmers, and we kind of showed that in visual motifs. And I'll pass this off to Zack because this is probably my favorite part about Rabbitfolk. But what is that farming implement based on?
Yeah, so we gave them all farming implements as their weapons. Balin's got a scythe that's actually made out of a hot chili pepper.
That's so clever.
Yeah, overall, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that like the rabbits really went hard and all in on vegetable shapes. So like most of their metal casting is all just things that you would find in your garden at home.
Please don't use carrots as weapons.
Yeah. Or do.
It's not legal advice.
You do you.
Yeah, I like the turnip-looking beet or turnip. It looks more turnip to me on the big staff too. That's just the shape language is really really cool with the rabbits.
Good to bludgeon with.
Yeah, even in their costuming too, like you can see, we did a lot of like color transitions in their costuming where it sort of hit like a bunch of vegetable hues there too.
It's beautiful. Okay, next up.
So
Batfolk.
Batfolk were our black-white archetype. And we kind of, when I first saw the Batfolk, I was like, okay, when bats spread their wings and when I saw Zack doing like trials, they look like cloaks, right? And then bats are nocturnal, so tying them in some way to the moon and the stars and that kind of thing felt supernatural. In black and white, I mean, the night sky is just a shade of black and white, right? That's really cool. And we knew we wanted something that felt, again, classically magic. So leaning into the clerics, the warlocks, that kind of like lunar magic where they're calling energy from the cosmos is, where we landed.
Yeah, and I knew I wanted something with them that kind of landed a little Muppety. Um, and just like kind of hit that like, again, that like 1980s sort of like fantasy vibe a little bit. This is a beautiful piece that April gave us on the push that eventually made it through to the final card set. But this might be the only one that we ended up with that had like such a strong like Luna moth motif.
Those like people make the little like metal like elf ears. Someone needs to make that with those lunar moth ears. I would buy that so quickly. All right, next up we have Otterfolk.
Yeah, like I've said, our vision lead was adamant we needed otters, and it was a great place to land. And otters are these kind of chaos monsters. If anybody's gone to a zoo, and we knew what we wanted them in red and black, or red and blue rather. So we had blue solved, right? They swim, but how we're going to get red? And so we gave them lightning magic and the ability to kind of like cast really cool lightning bolt spells. And then for personalities, it's like, well, if they cast lightning, maybe they're just like storm chasers. If anybody's seen, like those storm chaser documentaries or whatever, these are like the people who like follow tornadoes and try and like get the perfect shot. Instead of a perfect shot, they're trying to like bottle Calamity Beast power in these kind of baubles that you see all over their persons.
Yeah, otters, it's more of a sea otter thing, but they have like natural pockets that they like to keep things in. So I knew that when I was working on the costuming for the otters that they had to have lots of like either compartments or like those magical spheres that they can actually store their spells for later. And then of course we ended up with Otter Ball, which this was a side thing we wanted to kind of do with the otters, where we had to give them their own sport. And on top of that, like this world is just adventurers, so like their costuming still has to kind of look like they can go adventuring in it, but hit sport at the same time. You can see like in the shoulder pad on Kitsa, she actually has like a team logo and everything just built into her.
Yeah, what I love so much is the exposed midriffs. It feels like super athletic for some reason.
Yeah, yeah. I was like looking at a lot of like diving wear, just something that was like sleek and hugged to the body.
Okay, and then obviously we can't make an animal set without Squirrelfolk. So I'm really curious what we did to differentiate these squirrels from the hundreds of other squirrels that we have made in Magic.
So when you think of squirrels, I usually think of, Chatterfang or a random squirrel token that's kind of gnarly. We wanted squirrels to have an elegance to them, and I think it's mostly the concept by April Prime here that kind of drove that. When we saw this, we were like, oh, this is everything we want from a squirrel,
Yeah.
right?
She really hit it on like the very first go.
From the world building angle, since they deal with kind of black and green, we knew we wanted to relate them to kind of Calamity Beasts and Necromancy. And for black and green, we had this kind of range of skeletons, which Zack can probably talk about even better, with leaf skeletons and actual real skeletons.
Yeah, so since the Squirrelfolk are in green and black, if you go to the next slide here, you can actually see all their weapons are based off of leaf skeletons. So like the green squirrels like kind of focus on leaf skeletons, and then as soon as you go towards the black side of squirrels, they lean more on real skeletons, like put into their tail costuming and whatnot.
I love this so much because you have those maple leaf is so cozy, it's so fall, it's just like I want a blanket and a coffee and a book. Mm-hmm. But the second you get to these, this is like when it's turning to winter, right? And those leaves are crisp, they're crunchy. You could probably hurt someone with one.
Yeah, as soon as you cast a maple leaf in metal, it becomes very, very sharp.
Yes. All right, and then final animal type we're going to talk about today is
second to final.
Second to final, sorry, is we have a lot of mouse here.
Yeah.
Mouse. We have a lot of mouse here, everyone. We have a lot of mice here. So I know you're excited about this one, Neal.
Yeah, I love Mousefolk. Like this is the archetypal. Like when you're in anthropomorphic media, this is your hero. We have them in red, white, which is my bias, but the most heroic of colors. And we have all these awesome capes that show like motion and stuff like that. But really core. These were like our little heroes. They had to have really cute little swords, and they need to look like they could take down a foe 14 times their size, or at least give it a good shot.
Yeah, in addition to the capes, like just giving them like thin rapier-style weapons helped them look very, very heroic. I don't think we actually ended up doing anything with those like jump sandals on that page, actually. That was cool. Yeah, so you can see it very, very much in that Chris Ron piece on the right, just like hitting the tiny hero vibes there, and the danger level for the set.
Yeah, it's one of those pieces that we got back, and I think we were all kind of like, oh yeah, this is exactly what the most dark parts of Bloomburrow feel like. You can see like the sword ignited with fire, the rotten mouth viper curling around. It's standing on a pile of skulls.
Yeah. And this was also a good piece just to show off like how physics has to behave at a small scale. A lot of the things we were figuring out for like the frogs, the lizards, and the mice were all like small scale fire and water. So obviously like when the fire is only this big, it's like gonna act totally differently from a large raging fire. And this is one of those pieces that you just like drop an F-bomb when it comes in.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love that you said this is what the darkest part of Bloomburrow looks like, because at the center is this bright light, and I think that's one of the things that makes Bloomburrow so special.
agreed. It's playing the balancing act between the brightness and the coziness that we really wanted to emphasize, but also making sure that there's still some kind of danger. Like this is still a magic set, and this is still a set where you can go on adventures, and you need stakes and things to fight.
Oh, fun side fact on that piece on the bottom too by Ryan Pancoast. We did not know that it was a bard right away, so he actually did that whole painting without the loot first, and then had to add the loot after the fact.
And it's
Yeah, it looks like it was
Ryan.
always
It's
there.
great, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then last, just to emphasize their like quick motion, they have this like cool stuttering effect that we wanted to do on a bunch of cards just because it looks super sweet. And they also pair with fireflies just to also emphasize some like light trails and things.
Creates a lot of motion in a card set, and especially since we're working with still images, the idea of having a character moving around the screen so fast that they're blurring, I'm glad we got like a magical solve to that.
Okay, and now we get to talk about the final one, which I can't believe I forgot, because Helga is my favorite character in the entire set. If you've read the story, Helga is absolutely amazing. Let's talk about Frogfolk.
So Frogfolk were our green-blue archetype. We knew that they were going to bounce things, but frogs always kind of look grumpy and depressed. I feel like that's just kind of their thing. And so what would make someone more grumpy or depressed if they could actually see into the future and then be, terrorized by their own visions?
Neal is an optimist, for everyone who was wondering.
Yeah. So we wanted these frogs to be augurs. So they're kind of reading using scrying magic, seeing into the future. Kind of that's their way they interact with calamity beasts. And so a lot of them are kind of grumpy, not because they're innately grumpy, but because if you had to see the future and Valley might get destroyed, you kind of be like, wow, I don't know if I want to see the future anymore. Like, please stop.
Those are some of my favorite weapon designs we came up with for this whole set too, just because it looks magical and also like looks really small scale with the way the water's forming.
The thing that I love the most is the way that water connects these like copper that's been oxidized together. That to me is super magical. It's not just a physical weapon.
Yeah.
Immediately becomes a magical weapon as soon as you have this kind of weird wave shape in the middle.
Looks very high fantasy.
Well, especially because, I know Helga, especially in the set, she can manipulate those water drops. She can,
Yes.
at one point, she creates like kind of stairs for Mabel to walk up just using little water droplets, which is so cool.
Kitty patootie.
Yeah, this one we just wanted to include because it was just a great concept to final. It's just a very caring father.
Yeah, it was one of those ones that I think the designers also saw it and were like, yeah, this should be this card, and designed a card for it. And it's just a cute frog dad helping his little tadpoles.
So this was actually, the next few slides are just very random things that we knew the set needed, because like the leaf leather and animals not wearing other animals, animals were not also going to ride other animals. So how do you get around that? You actually make the mounts out of sort of like living plant elementals.
Right, and like you could put a mouse on a bird, but then it would have to probably have the bird type, and that complicates the design of it. So having an inanimate object that they can just ride is, I think, the perfect solve.
I only saw this top right piece very small, and now that I'm seeing it bigger, this is absolutely amazing.
The seed shooter?
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible.
Just the like screaming, I can hear this card.
Yeah, raccoons ended up in like a large moving mobile hedge. I don't know if you've ever seen the shots of like raccoons where like you see an entire family just poking their head out of a tree trunk all at the same time. That was kind of the vibe with this.
It's also cool. It's like very like root structure coming to, it's almost like Baba Yaga's hut kind of vibe.
It's a little
Really
creepy, especially at final.
cool. Well, especially at night, you just see like the little eyes all poking out. It looked like a giant monster with like 1,000 eyes.
Just a little creepy and a little less cute is like a great way to hit Magic the Gathering too.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And then this I like incessantly wanted. I just bugged everybody until we finally made a card that included it, but it was a mobile bat cart being pulled in by some servant skunks.
Right. And I think the skunks worked so well with this, and like the concept by Amanda and Aurora, the idea of skunks, like these black white color palette, they look kind of regal and they're kind of carrying this like almost palanquin. It's just like immediately like cool vibes, and you don't know why this is happening, but you're like, I want to know more.
And Zach, you were telling me it's also kind of that like 80s fantasy and like the sky.
Oh yeah.
especially.
The palette especially, and just like that sort of like dark elegance definitely hits like 80s fantasy.
Yeah, I feel like this kid, like the sky colors, like really remind me of those like wolf T-shirts, you know?
Yeah.
It's like that exact color scheme. And then, anybody recognize this character?
Yeah. So when we got this piece of art in, this wasn't tied to a character, but then you see it and you go, yeah, that's a legend in the set, right? Like, there's no question. And so you kind of, we knew we wanted a weasel for the story, and we were like, hey, Roy, our story lead, can this just be Cruel Claw? And he was, of course, like, yeah, this is the coolest thing I've seen all day.
Yeah, everyone absolutely fell in love with April's design, like right out of the gate. So
The scratched out eye is so beautiful. And then I love that his rapier has poison on it, because if you've read the story, Cruel Claw does not fight fair.
Yeah, originally it also had Death Touch, but, you know.
Okay, so after we have defined a lot of what goes into this, is what I think is probably the hardest part, which is communicating all of that to a lot of other people and actually going into the concepting stage.
Yeah, concepting is like a 3-month, 4-month grueling extravaganza to make every single card have a piece of art. So what happens is we're given this card file by all of our designers that have awesome card designs, and then we sit in a room for like 2 weeks and come up with tons of ideas for every single card that relate to the mechanics and how we express them. Then each of these writers kind of writes a concept, sends it to an art director to approve, and then we get sketches back and we get final art back. And it takes a ton of time, and the real consideration is making sure that every single card matches both mechanically and on the world building end. So you have a card that says deal 3 damage, we're going to show an otter maybe doing a lightning bolt or something. Or you have a card that has 14 lines of text, and you got to figure that one out too.
yeah, I'm gonna call out Sam too. Sam's one of my co-art directors, and if she's in the room, if she could just give a wave. Yeah, there we go.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Sam. All right, so let's go through some of the concept to final pieces. So Neal, can you take us through this?
Yeah, and don't worry if you can't read it. This will be recorded. So this is kind of like what an artist is given. So an artist is given this concept that has the plane, its color alignment, location, and then just the general vibe of, in this case, a character or a scene. And so here we're seeing us create a legend from scratch. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the pages from the world guide that the writer is referencing. So they're saying, hey, I want you to design this character and use these pages to kind of guide the way that you're designing. And this is the final.
Yeah, so this is how the artist ended up utilizing that page before. Bird obviously changed, and that is because the artist I knew I wanted for this card, Jesper, is a very avid bird watcher, and he's Danish. So I wanted to make sure that the bird that he ended up painting was actually something that was native to his hometown.
Next is one that I love. I think this is one of my favorite Lizardfolk in the entire set. And so here we were trying to capture the idea of like they wear masks, they use these slingshots and this agate. And so this was something that like dealt damage to some targets when we were contemplating cards. So we wanted to make sure it felt like dealing range damage. And so you can kind of see the kind of thought process as we made this.
And here's the final.
Yeah, I just love this piece. It did everything that the Lizardfolk were supposed to be doing.
I love how there's some agate kind of falling out of their satchel. Like, oh, what's going on?
I'm obsessed with this piece.
Yeah.
Did anybody go to Game Nights Live last night? Yeah. Did you guys see Jimmy and his snail friend? Absolutely iconic.
Famously piloted by Jimmy Wong. Wick was one of those characters that we just got a piece of concept art in, just like Cruel Claw, and we said, yeah, this is a legend. Like, there's no real question. But in the action line of this concept, we really tried to emphasize the idea that they're doing this really cool magical effect. They're kind of bringing a ton of energy to the table here, just to kind of take what was a flat image and turn it into like a scene that you can picture in your mind.
Yeah, so you can see on the bottom one too, like there was some mention to, if you go back, yeah, there we go. Wick worships this like god snail. So that's the god snail. It didn't end up in the final set, but it's actually, as you come to find out, Wick doesn't actually worship the snail itself. The snail has a parasite inside, so it's actually worshiping a worm that's inside the snail.
And here's a final. You can see like all that motion kind of captured. The snails having this dark purple energy coming out of them. And then I asked Gavin to post a thread just to see what people's favorite pieces of art were from the card file. And so we have two to show you. One is Stargaze, and I think the artist is actually here at Gen Con.
Yep, Serena's in the artist alley.
Right. And so for this, there's that really misguided adage, blind as a bat. And so we were kind of playing with that and saying, like, what if they didn't go blind? What if, that it isn't already true, but we're going to do something cool with it. And so when Batfolk age, their eyes kind of give way to being able to see beyond the cosmos. And you can see nebulas and stuff in their eyes. And I knew I needed this on a card. And Serena's piece just captured it, especially those, like, fingers.
I love the fingers. I don't know why. I can feel them, right?
Yeah, she did amazingly on all of her pieces for that set.
And then this was actually the first piece of final art that we got back for Bloomburrow. It's actually so early that we didn't even have a world guide to reference any of these images. So when we did this, we were like, let's capture the moment of Bloomburrow that we think is most important. And this is small heroism facing off against these giant adversarial beasts. And obviously, Ryan Panko's, crushed it here.
Yeah, just totally nailed it.
In my headcanon, this is not real, but in my headcanon, this is one of Mabel's ancestors fighting a calamity beast. All right, so we're going to move into wrap up. So, Neal, if you can take us through Bloomburrow in a nutshell. Neal wrote it. Okay, I blame him.
Oh, no. Wow. Low pressure. No, but so as we look back on Bloomburrow and we kind of look at the things we did and the world that we created, I think in the multiverse, we've created a kind of unique plane, one that has cooperation as a fundamental value. We wanted to make sure that when people came into this setting, they weren't trying to fight their animal folk together. And I think mechanically, if anybody's played it, you can make a deck that has rats and mice together if you wanted. Be 4 colors, but crazy. But that was one of the kind of guiding principles. And then the other thing that Zack and I talked about so much was the idea of Bloomburrow as a place where we can kind of grow and expand and kind of like revisit. We wanted to make sure that the first time we went to Bloomburrow, we just carved out a little piece and said, is this cool? Like, should we keep coming back? And I think we really succeeded there. People are already talking to me about like, hey, like, is there more stuff? And I'm like, I don't know, but thanks for telling me you want it.
This was actually one of the first final art pieces that I saw because I was talking with Zack and I was trying to get an understanding of like the overall feel of the set for a project. And he sent me this and I was won over immediately. I love that it's a parent and child and the parent is just vibing while the child is just like, yeah. It's just such a cool moment of that community, that family vibe that we wanted to see in Bloomburrow.
Oh, and there's also some cinnamon sticks they're holding.
Isn't that amazing?
So cute.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Neal and to Zack for creating this beautiful world and talking to us about it today.
Yeah. And thanks to our host, Harless.